General Hospital spoilers reveal that Portia had tried to maintain her silence, hoping that the storm Drew brought into her life would pass. But the pressure was mounting faster than she could contain. Every interaction with him left her more shaken, more disillusioned with the man she once saw as honorable. Drew had crossed a line, several lines, by coercing her to falsify Michael's medical records in an effort to paint him as an unfit, drug-addicted father. All so he could secure Willow's unwavering allegiance. It was never about protecting anyone, it was about possession, domination, and control. At first, Portia resisted internally. Caught in the crosshairs of her professional ethics and the threats Drew dangled over her head. She was afraid of losing her career, her marriage to Curtis, and everything she had built. But the more Drew pushed, the clearer it became that she had no choice but to push back. Her conscience had become a battlefield, and now she was preparing to fight. What Drew hadn't accounted for was Portia's quiet resolve. She began documenting everything, notes after conversations, hidden voice memos, timestamps, and digital copies of every instruction and threat. He may have thought she was bending to his will, but Portia was building a defense, slowly and meticulously, turning every weapon Drew used against her into evidence. She knew that when the time came, she would need irrefutable proof to expose him, not just to the hospital board, but to Willow, Michael, and maybe even Sonny. But there was another shift happening beneath the surface, one more dangerous and unexpected. In an act of silent rebellion, Portia began altering Drew's own medical records, making subtle adjustments that, if uncovered, would cast serious doubt on his psychological stability and professional credibility. It wasn't something she had planned, it was an instinct. A survival mechanism triggered by the realization that the man pulling her strings needed to be disarmed, permanently. With every passing day, the weight of her choices threatened to crush her. She couldn't sleep, couldn't think clearly, and even Curtis had begun to notice her unraveling. But she couldn't tell him, not yet. This had to be done precisely and without error. Drew's reach was vast, and Portia knew that a single mistake could destroy her before she had a chance to expose him. She found herself avoiding his calls, rehearsing false explanations, lying to her colleagues about her late nights in the office. But under that exhaustion was fire. She was angry, not just at Drew, but at herself for letting it go this far. She wasn't a victim anymore. She was a witness, and soon, she would be a whistleblower. The complexity of the situation wasn't lost on her. If she revealed the truth now, Michael might be saved. But her complicity would be exposed. If she stayed quiet, Drew would succeed in annihilating Michael's reputation and severing his bond with his children. Portia was playing a dangerous game of timing, waiting for the moment when her evidence would matter most, when the damage Drew intended to cause could be intercepted just in time. Every file she saved, every note she encrypted, was part of a larger picture, a trap she was constructing around the man who had thought he could control her. She knew Drew would become more aggressive as time went on, especially if he suspected her disobedience. So, she made sure her tracks were covered, creating backups, storing files on secure drives, and giving coded hints in innocuous medical memos that would only make sense if things went horribly wrong. In this web of deception, Portia also began to realize that she wasn't alone. She started watching how Willow interacted with Drew, looking for signs that she, too, was beginning to sense something was off. She considered approaching Nina, who had her own grudges against Drew and who might be willing to help her bring the truth to light. But trust was scarce, and every move had to be calculated. Portia was now walking a line between two realities, one in which she remained complicit and silent, and one where she burned everything down to save not just Michael, but herself. She was done being a puppet. What Drew failed to see was that in trying to ruin Michael, he had pushed Portia into becoming the very force that could ruin him. She looked at the files again late one night, her hands trembling. There was one final change she had to make, an annotation in Drew's chart that would, if questioned, suggest the presence of erratic behavior consistent with emotional instability. It was small, barely noticeable to the untrained eye, but it was the beginning of a new narrative. A new record. A new weapon. Portia wasn't just correcting a lie anymore, she was laying the foundation for a truth that would obliterate the man who had tried to use her as a pawn. In that moment, she wasn't afraid. She was ready. Drew had underestimated her, but now the game was changing, and Portia held the key to his destruction. Carly and Michael had kept their suspicions to themselves for too long. But the weight of Drew's twisted manipulations had finally become too much to bear. They could no longer remain silent while Drew methodically dismantled everything Michael had built, his reputation, his custody rights, and his emotional connection to Wiley and Amelia. The time had come to speak out, to shine a harsh light on the darkness that Drew had tried so hard to conceal. Carly, driven by equal parts maternal instinct and righteous fury, confronted the horrifying realization that Drew, once a trusted ally, had crossed into territory that could not be forgiven. Her voice trembled with rage as she laid out the cruel orchestration behind the falsified medical records, the blackmail, and the psychological warfare that had pushed Michael into a corner. Michael, for his part, stood with a stoicism that barely concealed the fury churning beneath his surface. This wasn't just about him, it was about protecting his children from a man who had proven he would destroy anyone to maintain his illusion of control. Yet what neither Carly nor Michael fully understood was that the chaos Drew had ignited wasn't solely his doing anymore. In the shadows, Portia was playing her own dangerous game. One that threatened to spiral into madness. She had become the unwilling architect of Drew's vendetta, her hands forced into altering Michael's records. Her silence purchased with the currency of fear and compromise. But Portia wasn't merely following orders, she was gambling with consequences. Hoping that by manipulating the narrative against Michael just enough, she might satisfy Drew's hunger for control without causing irreparable harm. What she hadn't accounted for was the emotional damage already done, the public perception already shifting, and the legal implications snowballing into something she could no longer stop. Her bet on Michael becoming the scapegoat in Drew's plan had turned into an obsession of her own, a dark need to see the plan through even as she questioned its morality. She had convinced herself that the ends would justify the means, but deep down, Portia was losing herself to the very storm she'd helped unleash. As Carly and Michael presented their findings to those they trusted, Jason, Ava, and even a hesitant Willow, it became clear that Drew's web of deceit was far more intricate than anyone had imagined. Drew had anticipated resistance, but not this swift unraveling of alliances. Michael's testimony, bolstered by documentation that Portia didn't know he had backed up before the records were changed, painted a damning picture. Carly's ability to connect the dots, every suspicious delay at the hospital, every odd interaction between Drew and Portia, every whisper of blackmail, began to crack open a scandal that would not be contained. But just as the truth threatened to surface, Portia doubled down. Her fear of exposure, of losing everything, pushed her into deeper complicity. She began adjusting other files, subtly discrediting Michael's past treatments and planting suggestions of instability that could later be interpreted as long-standing issues. She wasn't just helping Drew anymore, she was ensuring her own survival, even if it meant pushing Michael over the edge. In doing so, Portia awakened a different kind of obsession, one not born of control like Drew's, but of guilt and dread. She watched Michael closely, noted the shifts in his behavior, and questioned whether the damage she was complicit in had already gone too far. Carly sensed something was wrong but couldn't quite place it. And Portia's increasing paranoia only made her more unpredictable. The lines between victim and villain were blurring fast, and with every desperate action, Portia became more entangled in the consequences she feared. She had hoped to manipulate fate quietly, invisibly, but now found herself at the epicenter of an implosion she could no longer prevent. Meanwhile, Michael began feeling the emotional toll. The accusations about his alleged drug use began to seep into court documents, whispered conversations among family members, and even questions from social workers. Though he knew the truth, fighting against a lie that had been expertly seeded by both Drew and Portia was like trying to shout over a hurricane. Every attempt to defend himself only made him seem more defensive. Willow, torn between residual affection and confusion, began to question whether Michael was the same man she once loved. This erosion of trust, subtle, methodical, was precisely what Drew had wanted. And Portia, though she tried to tell herself she was a reluctant participant, had become one of the most powerful architects of that erosion. But Carly, never one to let her son be destroyed without a fight, was already rallying allies. She was digging deeper, threatening lawsuits, demanding audits of medical records, and dragging Jason into a new investigation that would expose not just Drew's treachery but Portia's complicity. In doing so, she lit a fire that would force everyone to pick a side, and Portia, who had so carefully walked the line between guilt and survival, now found herself with no place left to hide. The game had changed. The secrets were surfacing. And the reckoning was coming. Drew is teetering on the edge of total collapse as the carefully constructed facade he built through manipulation, coercion, and obsession begins to unravel under the weight of his own deceit. For months, he wielded power like a weapon, bending allies to his will, blackmailing Portia into falsifying Michael's medical records, and spinning a web of lies that allowed him to tighten his grip on Willow. But Port Charles is no longer blind to his tactics. The announcement of his termination from the Senate is the first public blow in what is becoming a complete dismantling of his influence. It's no longer just whispers behind closed doors. His name is now synonymous with scandal, corruption, and abuse of power. The moral decay he tried to hide behind a polished smile and political title is now exposed, and the very foundations of his legacy are crumbling with each passing hour. What intensifies the fallout is the collateral damage his actions are inflicting on Willow. Once the center of his obsessive devotion, she now finds herself vilified by association. Her once respected image as a nurse, a mother, and a survivor is now tainted by her entanglement with Drew's schemes. Community support is fading fast. Her colleagues at the hospital are beginning to question her integrity, wondering whether she was complicit or simply naive. Former friends keep their distance, and even the Quartermaine name, which once offered a shield of status, no longer provides sanctuary. As more revelations surface about Drew's attempt to frame Michael, weaponize Portia's past, and manipulate custody over Wiley and Amelia, public sympathy turns to outrage. There is a growing sentiment in Port Charles that Drew and Willow must leave, that their continued presence is a threat to the fragile trust the community still clings to. Carly, having discovered the full extent of Drew's deception, is furious and mobilizing every resource she has to make sure he pays for the chaos he's caused. She's not alone. Michael, betrayed and nearly ruined by Drew's campaign to destroy his credibility, has declared open war. The once quiet tension between Michael and Drew has exploded into a public feud. And as the town chooses sides, Drew finds himself increasingly isolated. Even those who once supported him politically are abandoning ship, eager to disassociate before the flames of scandal consume them too. The Board of Ethics has launched a formal investigation into his conduct, and whispers of legal consequences are growing louder by the day. Portia, once blackmailed into silence, is now cooperating with the authorities. Her documentation of Drew's threats, combined with Carly and Michael's testimony, is forming a damning case against him. The psychological weight of Drew's downfall is immense. He stalks through the remnants of his influence like a ghost, unable to grasp how quickly the tide has turned. He once believed he could manipulate anyone, twist any situation to serve his needs. But now his name elicits disgust and distrust. The power he worshipped has vanished, and the people he once controlled are reclaiming their voices. For Drew, the humiliation is only deepening. There's talk not just of criminal charges but of full public expulsion, removal from Port Charles not just in law but in spirit. The idea of exile is becoming more real by the day. And the man who once thought he could control every variable now finds himself stripped of control, dignity, and allies. Willow's disillusionment is no less tragic. She fought to believe in Drew, convinced herself that his love was genuine, that his intentions were pure. But she now sees the pattern of control, the obsession masked as protection, and the damage left in his wake. Her silence, once born from loyalty, is now a source of shame. She's begun to pull away, haunted by the realization that the man she defended was slowly destroying everyone around him, including her. Even if she stays in Port Charles, her role in the drama has left deep scars. She's no longer seen as the victim, but as the accomplice who turned a blind eye while Drew dismantled lives. For many, that makes her just as culpable. The thought of losing her children, Amelia and Wiley, now feels like a real possibility. Especially if Michael pursues full custody on the grounds that her judgment has been compromised. In the backdrop of this chaos, Jason's return only magnifies Drew's failure. Jason, long thought to be the past, now emerges as a figure of quiet resolve, aligned with Carly and determined to help Michael heal. His calm competence, his silent understanding, and his refusal to be manipulated stand in stark contrast to Drew's increasingly frantic attempts to regain control. While Jason reclaims the respect he once held in Port Charles, Drew spirals further into desperation, consumed by the collapse of everything he once valued. And yet, perhaps the cruelest irony is this. Drew's entire downfall began from a place of fear of losing Willow, of losing control, of becoming irrelevant. In trying to prevent that fate, he ensured it. Now, as the final threads of his influence unravel and Port Charles prepares to cast him out, Drew stands alone, a man who played every angle, crossed every line, and lost everything in the process. The exile, whether official or social, is not just a punishment. It's a reckoning. One that Port Charles will remember. And one that Drew will never escape. Portia and Michael are no longer the victims in Drew's twisted game, they are becoming the architects of his unraveling. And what began as quiet defiance is transforming into a calculated and merciless counterstrike. For too long, Drew had operated under the assumption that fear and guilt would keep Portia paralyzed. That her past mistakes and fragile moral ground would make her easy to control. He believed that Michael, still recovering from trauma, would fold under the weight of humiliation and public suspicion. But what Drew failed to understand was that pressure doesn't always break people, it sharpens them. And now, with mounting rage and strategic clarity, Portia and Michael are ready to retaliate in a way that will redefine the power dynamics of Port Charles. This is no longer about self-preservation. It's about retribution. Portia, who once trembled at the thought of her career being ruined, has gathered every shred of evidence she once hid in shame. The manipulated test results, the hidden backups. The emails Drew thought she deleted, all of it has been carefully preserved. And while Drew saw her hesitance as weakness, it was really patience. She was biding her time, collecting ammunition. Waiting for the moment she could strike not from emotion but from irrefutable truth. Michael, meanwhile, has evolved. His world was shattered not just by Drew's betrayal, but by the terrifying near loss of his daughter Daisy and the cruel manipulation of his medical history. But instead of being consumed by victimhood, Michael has tapped into a new resolve, an almost ruthless focus on restoring control and safeguarding the legacy he's built for Wiley and Amelia. His alliance with Portia is not built on sympathy. It's built on shared trauma and a mutual understanding that the only way to defeat a monster is to become something more cunning. Michael now knows what Drew is capable of, he's seen how far he'll go to keep Willow under his thumb, and how willing he is to turn others into disposable pawns. So together, Michael and Portia orchestrate a plan that mirrors Drew's own tactics but amplifies them with precision and purpose. They confront Drew not with emotion, but with data. A digital file of Portia's coerced alterations to Michael's medical file. Audio recordings of Drew threatening her career and marriage. Confidential hospital logs that show unexplained access to Michael's health records. But they go further than Drew ever did, they issue a direct ultimatum that leaves no room for ambiguity. If Drew does not immediately resign from his public position, retract his claims against Michael, and cease all involvement in Willow's personal life, then the entire scandal goes public. And it won't just be a local embarrassment. Portia and Michael are prepared to leak the story to national media, to the Medical Ethics Board, to the Bar Association, and even to the State Political Ethics Committee. Drew's life, so carefully constructed on reputation and charisma, will crumble under the weight of this carefully documented campaign of coercion. But even more unsettling is the quiet fury behind Michael's voice, the composure in Portia's eyes. They are not doing this for attention. They are doing this because they have nothing left to lose, and that makes them dangerous. And Drew knows it. He sees it now. In the way Michael no longer looks at him with confusion or betrayal but with calculation. In the way Portia no longer flinches but stares through him like a scientist dissecting a failed experiment. They have become immune to his threats because they have accepted the worst, and that's when a person becomes untouchable. Yet even as Drew tries to formulate a countermove, his resources are dwindling. Willow is beginning to question his grip on her life. Carly, who once held reservations, now sides with her son and Portia. Jason, quiet but watchful, is connecting dots behind the scenes. Mina, burned by Drew's past manipulation, is whispering into the ears of Ava and Sunny. The tide is turning, and Drew, once the hunter, is now the prey. The obsession he cultivated, over Willow, over control, over dominance, is now consuming him from within. The paranoia sets in. Every text he receives feels like a trap. Every knock on the door feels like an ambush. He begins to unravel, desperate to salvage fragments of the control he once wielded like a weapon. But this is more than just a power reversal. It is a reckoning. Drew isn't just losing his title or his influence, he's losing the narrative. The carefully curated image of a protector, a hero, a man of justice, that's been shattered. And the ones doing the shattering aren't villains. They are the very people he underestimated. Portia, once bound by guilt, now wields the truth like a scalpel. Michael, once burdened by trauma, now channels it into silent determination. Together, they are writing a new chapter in the legacy of Port Charles, one that does not reward corruption, even if it's wrapped in charm and legacy. And Drew? He's learning that once you cross certain lines, you don't get to choose how you're remembered. As the walls close in and whispers become headlines, Drew's world collapses into silence, the silence of power lost, of allies gone, of a legacy in ruins. Meanwhile, Portia and Michael stand on the ashes of his empire, not with triumph, but with clarity. They didn't win because they outmaneuvered Drew. They won because they endured. And now, Port Charles belongs to the ones who refuse to stay silent.